In this lecture, we'll be adding an unordered list to our document. An unordered list looks like this. We can see the heading, and then the list items in no particular order. So in our HTML document, let's go ahead and first insert the heading for our list. We'll use the h3 tags. Once we have the header created, we can start the list. To create an unordered list, we use the open and close UL tag, which stands for unordered list, as you probably guessed. Now inside the UL tags, we create the list items using the LI tag. So there's the open and the close LI tag. And we can just insert the first list item within these tags. We'll just insert a few other items to populate the list. And there it is. This is the complete list with the heading. Let's save the file and once again preview it in our web browser. That's what the list looks like in the browser. In addition to unordered lists, we also have ordered lists. The list items in an ordered list are identifiable by sequential numerical values. Let's take a look at an example. Here we have the heading My Favorite Vacations, and underneath we have each list item. Attached to each list item is a number. And so this is an ordered list. Let's go ahead and create the ordered list in our HTML document. To begin, we'll start by entering a header, just like we did for our last list, which was the unordered list. So we'll start off with h3. Now to create the ordered list, we start with the open and close OL tag, which stands for ordered list. And in between these tags, just create an indent by pressing the tab key and start creating your list items. And that's what the list looks like. Notice we don't have to specify the actual value attached to each list item. That will be created automatically, starting with from lowest to highest. So let's go ahead and save this file and preview what the list looks like in our web browser. So there it is. We have the header and each list item with the sequential numerical value attached next to it. So far, we've worked quite a bit with text data. Our next objective is to insert some images into our document. We've included 4 images in the downloads file pertaining to this lecture. You can use these images or your own set of images. Regardless of which images you use, you must place them in the same folder as your HTML file. This is because we'll be using relative file referencing. We'll explain relative versus absolute file referencing in the next lecture. First, let's start with a heading, and we can place our images under this heading. With our heading created, let's create a paragraph so we have some spacing between our heading and the images that we're going to insert. I'll start by inserting the first image. This is done with the image tag. The image tag has several attributes. For the purpose of this lecture, we'll use the source attribute, which defines the location of the image. We'll also use the width and height attribute, which defines the size of the image. With our first image created or inserted, let's insert the second image. I'll also specify the width and height of this image. And the third image. The image tag, as you can see, does not require a closing image tag. For the fourth image, we're going to insert an image from the internet. So for the source, we'll be using the URL of the image. This is called an absolute file reference because it includes the full path of the image. And once again, our next lecture is going to talk more about absolute and relative file referencing. So this is an image found on a Wikipedia page. And I'll just specify the width and height as well. Okay, and so we've inserted 4 images. 3 images have a relative file reference. They're located within the same directory as our HTML file. We've specified the width and height of each image. And for the last image, the source is an external web page. So we've included a URL of or a link to the image, and also the width and height as well. So let's go ahead and save this file and preview what it looks like in our web browser. So as you can see, we now have 4 images inserted into our document. To embed video in an HTML5 document, we can use the video element. Inside the element, we can set various attributes. First, we can set the width and height using fixed dimensions or percentage. In this example, we have the width set to 600 pixels. So you can see that the video width stays at 600 pixels regardless of the browser window size. If we set it to 100%, the video will take up the full content area of the web browser. We can use the controls attribute to specify if we want the user to be able to see the control menu. This includes the play button, the progress bar, the volume, and full screen controller. If you do not want the controls, simply remove the controls attribute. And after saving the file, you can see that the controller is no longer there. Remember to add an autoplay attribute if you remove the controls. Otherwise, the video will not play automatically and your user will have no way to play the video. So I'll save the file and refresh, and you can see that the video now starts automatically. The autoplay attribute does not work in mobile devices like iPads and iPhones, so that is something to keep in mind. The video element requires that we specify the source of the video. We've included a demo video you can use in the downloads folder corresponding to this lesson. Just make sure that you place the video in the same directory that you've saved this HTML file into. The video is titled ya.mp4. Next to the source, we've specified the video type. And underneath the source tag, it's a good idea to notify the user if their browser does not support the video tag. That way they'll know to update their browser. And lastly, close the video tag. And so as you can see, it's fairly easy to work with this element. In this lesson, we'll explore absolute versus relative file referencing. The concept is best illustrated with an example. In our last exercise, we inserted a video into our HTML page. We did so using the video element, which required a source attribute. We've worked with the source attribute when inserting images as well. The source attribute requires that we specify the source location and name of the file we want to insert into our document. Since the files we've inserted to this point are in the same folder as the HTML file, we've only had to specify a file name. For example, ya.mp4. This is an example of relative file referencing. The path of the file is defined relative to its directory. Now say, for example, we wanted to insert an image into this document from an external source. For example, another website altogether. For that, we need to use absolute file referencing. An absolute file path requires that we include the complete address of the file as shown in this block of code that I'm about to insert. Here we've included a JPEG file from an external website, planwallpaper.com. The full URL to the file is required for the image to be displayed because it's from an external source. So now if I refresh the page, we can see that the image is outputted in our web browser. Here's the URL to the image, and you can see that it's displayed in the browser when we access it. And so that's all there is to it when it comes to relative versus absolute file referencing. In this lecture, we're going to explore link creation within our HTML document. We'll be creating both text links as well as image links. Let's start with adding a link on the images we inserted in the last lecture. We'll link each vacation picture to a relevant website. To do so, we'll be using the A tags. Add the following code around your first image. We'll start with the opening A tag, followed by the href attribute. And this attribute specifies where this image will link to. And we have to include the complete URL. In this case, we're going to have it linked to miami.com. Be very careful not to make any typos in the URL, otherwise the link will not work. And that's it for the first link. You'll notice that the closing A tag and the opening A tag do encompass the image tag and the image attributes. Okay, so the link must encompass the entire image from the opening tags to the closing. And let's just go ahead and apply a few other links as well to the other images. Now I'll just copy and paste this code to save time, and I'll change the link source. And now that I have all my links created and attached to the images, I'll go ahead and save my file and preview this in the web browser to make sure that all the links do work. So right away when I hover my mouse over these images, I can tell that a link is attached to the image because the cursor changes. Let's just go ahead and click on each one to make sure that the links do work. So it appears that each link does work, and that's how you apply links to images. Now let's go ahead and create textual links. Now the process of adding links to text is identical, but first we have to create a few lines of text to apply links to. So let's go ahead and create a new paragraph. And then just type some text. Now I'll just indent this text. And now we can begin adding the text links. We'll use the same links that we used last time because we know they work. You can just copy and paste from the other links we created. Okay, so now that we have our links applied, we can go ahead and just save the file. We'll test one of them just to make sure it works. I'm sure you get the idea. So we can see our list there. And we'll just click on florida.com. And it does go to the miami.com website. Now, one thing you'll notice is when I clicked on the link, it opened the link in the same browser window as our original page. A lot of times what you might need to do is open the link in a new browser window. So then that way the original window doesn't close. And the viewer can very easily revert back to it. And in order to do that, we need to add a target attribute to our A tag. So the target attribute looks like this. And to specify that we want this page to open in a new browser window, you put an underscore and type blank within the quotations. And that'll open in a new blank window. That's what that means. So just copy and paste that attribute into the other links. And then save your file and preview it in the browser. Okay, so now we can see that the link opens in a separate browser window. And it's a lot more convenient to switch back to our original page without having to press the back button. And it looks like each one is working and opening in a separate browser window. In the previous lecture, we explored adding links that take you to different web pages. Now we're going to work with anchor tags. Anchor tags allow us to link to a specific area of content on our existing page. Let's take a look at an example. On this page, you'll notice we have a table of contents at the top of the page that lists 5 articles. Article 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The idea is to have these items linked to their corresponding article on the same page. So if I click on Article 3, for example, you'll notice that the page navigates to the beginning of the 3rd article in our content area. And the same goes for Article 4, and so on and so forth. In order to make this work, we need to set up an anchor that will instruct a text link on the position of the article that corresponds to the link. We've included a file called anchors.html in the downloads folder corresponding to this lecture. You'll need to open this file in your text editor in order to follow along with this tutorial. So here we have the source code for the file. And in order to make this work, we'll have to go ahead and add a few anchors on all 5 article headings. To add the anchor, locate the article heading and insert the following code. You'll notice that we're using the A tag with an ID attribute. Later on in this tutorial, we're going to link to each one of these anchors from our table of contents. So once you've inserted your first named anchor, you'll need to insert the others in front of the other article headings. So just copy this block of code and paste it in front of each article heading. Remember to make sure you change the number of the article so it corresponds to the correct article heading. Now that we've inserted the named anchors, we'll need to link to them from our table of contents. So let's scroll up to the table of contents and add the following code around each article heading. You'll notice we're using the A tags with the href attribute. One difference is that we have a number sign in front of the link. The number sign instructs the browser not to divert the user to a new web page when the link is clicked. When the number sign is followed by an anchor name, the page will notice search for the anchor name on the existing page. It will then retrieve the content that is defined by the anchor position. So again, let's copy this block of code and create our links for the additional article headings. Once again, remember to change the number so it corresponds to the correct article heading. So once you've added all your links, save the file and preview the page in your web browser to make sure that everything works. So now we can see that each item in the table of contents does have a link attached to it, and let's just confirm that it does work. So Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, 4, and 5. In this lecture, we're going to be creating tables using HTML. When it comes to building web pages, it's very important to have a solid understanding of table structures. Tables allow us to organize data and content in an organized way. Table data is structured in the form of rows and columns. The intersection of a row with a column forms a table cell. The individual cells contain the actual data. Data can be in the form of text, images, or even video content. This example illustrates the structure of a basic table used to record the findings of a survey that asked respondents to list their favorite sport. Here we have a table with 2 columns and 9 rows, which gives us 18 individual cells. Let's start off by creating this table in a standard HTML5 document. For this, you'll need to open your text editor, and we'll also need to set up the basic HTML page structure as we learned in earlier lessons. Once you have the basic HTML page structure created, go ahead and save your file anywhere on your computer. You can save the file as tables.html. Make sure to put the HTML extension at the end. So by now this should all look familiar, and as you probably guessed, the code block for our table will be inserted between the open and closed body tags. We'll begin by adding our open and close table tags. The table tag also has several attributes. First, we can specify the width of the table. For now, we'll put the width as 100%. We'll come back to the width attribute once we have our table created, because there are different ways the width can be stated. Next, we can set a border for our table. Let's set the border to 1 pixel. And you can increase this value for a thicker border, or you can put 0 for no border. We can also put a border color attribute. And we'll set that to blue. Next, we can specify the cell spacing and cell padding attributes. This illustration provides a visual illustration of what each of these mean. The cell padding will define the amount of space around the cell contents. The cell spacing, on the other hand, will determine the amount of space between each cell in your table. And the unit of measurement for cell spacing and cell padding is also a pixel. Once we've defined these attributes, we can start adding rows and columns. Each row is defined by an open and close TR tag for table row. So I'll create one row to begin with. And inside each row, I can create any number of columns. So our table had 2 columns, and a column is represented by the open and close TD tag. You can insert your content inside the open and close TD tag. So the first part of our table was the headings. So that's what the first row would look like. Now I'll insert the second row. And again, each row had 2 columns. Just enter some data inside these columns. Made a mistake there. Okay, so remember, the first column was the sport, and we'll put the sport label in each of the first columns, and then the response in each of the second columns. I'm just copying and pasting. I'm just changing the sport labels, and also the data. And there it is. That's all the rows and columns for this particular table. So with the table created, let's save this file and preview it in our web browser to see the final result. And that's what the table looks like. One thing you may have noticed is the table is the full width of the browser's content area. And this is because we specified a table width of 100%. You'll notice that if we change the size of the browser window, that the table expands and contracts and always maintains 100% of the browser window. Now let's see what would happen if I change the width to 50%. So I'll go back to the source code and just change the width to 50%. And then refresh the page. Now we can see that the table always maintains 50% of the browser's content area. Okay, so with the percentage-based width, the table will always expand and contract to maintain that percentage, the specified percentage of the browser's content area. But what if we wanted the table to be a fixed width so it doesn't expand or contract with the browser window? For that, we would need to change the width from a percentage to a fixed value. So let's go ahead and change from 50% to 500. Now, if you don't specify a percentage, that converts the table width into a pixel-based table width. So 500 pixels will be the new width of this table. So we're going to save the file, and I'm just going to reload the web browser. And now you'll notice that no matter how big or small the browser window is, the table always stays at 500 pixels. In the last lecture, we explored how to create a basic table. Now we'll see how the table width behaves when one table is nested into another table cell. If a table is placed within another table, it's referred to as a nested table. The table containing the nested table is referred to as the parent table. Let's start by creating another table in our existing document that has one row and one column. We'll start with the open table tag, and we'll set the width to 100% to begin with. We'll apply a 1 pixel border. And we'll set the border color to red so we can distinguish our parent table from the nested table. We'll close our open table tag. And now we'll create the single row and the single column. So now that we have that table created, we want to nest our original table into our newly created parent table. So we have to do this very carefully. We need to copy this entire block of code from the close table tag right up to the open table tag on our original table. we're going to right click and cut this block of code and paste it inside within the TD tags on our new table. So right click and paste. And I'm just going to do a little bit of formatting so it helps us stay organized. Just highlight all the table rows and columns. You can, if you position your cursor here and hold the Shift key and click at the end of the area you want to highlight, it highlights the entire block of code, and then you can just indent by using the Tab key. Okay, so that just helps us stay a little bit more organized. Before we go any further, let's save our file and preview this in our browser to make sure that everything is working correctly. And so now we can see the parent table identified by the red border and the nested table with the blue border. So currently, our parent table is 100% and our nested table is 500 pixels. So for that reason, the parent table is taking up the full width of the content area of our browser, and the nested table is a fixed value at 500 pixels. Now let's try a couple of different scenarios to see what happens when we adjust the width of the nested table relevant to the parent. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is we'll change the width of the nested table to 50% rather than 500 pixels. Now save your changes and refresh the browser window. Now we can see as we expand and contract the browser window, our nested table is always occupying 50% of the parent table. Okay, I'll change the width of the parent table to 80%. Press refresh. And now the parent table is 80% of the content area of the browser window. And the nested table is 50% of the parent table. So it's a little bit confusing, but with a bit of practice, you'll get the hang of it. You'll notice that as we expand and contract the browser window, the nested table always stays at 50% of the parent table's width. Okay, this time we'll make the parent table 600 pixels and the nested table 100%. So this time the parent table is a fixed 600 pixels and the nested table is 100% of the 600 pixels. So as you can see, the width settings of the nested and parent table will affect the way the table is displayed in your browser. Oftentimes when working with tables, it's necessary to combine two columns into one. For example, on this table, the first row contains a heading, My Expenses. Since we don't need two columns in this row, let's go ahead and merge them. To do so, remove the second column in the first row. So here's our first row, the open and close TR tag. Inside we have two columns. I'm going to remove the second column, and next we need to add the col span attribute to the first column and set the value to 2. The colspan attribute defines the number of columns a cell should span. So I'll save the file and refresh. And as you can see, we've now merged the 2 columns in the first row. In certain cases, we may want to prevent text from wrapping onto multiple lines if there's not enough space in a cell to accommodate it in one line. To do this, we can attach a no-wrap attribute to the table column. To illustrate how this works, I'll need to enter a block of text into any one of our rows. I'll insert it into the first column. Now with the text inserted and the file saved, I'm going to refresh the page. You can see that the text is automatically forced onto the next line at the end of the row. Now if we add the no-wrap attribute, so this is the column that contains the text, and I'm going to add a no-wrap attribute. When I save the page and refresh, you can see that the text now appears on a single line. And there's going to be a bit of scrolling because it's a fairly long block of text. The table is automatically expanded to accommodate the entire block of text. We can use the background attribute to apply a background image to a table. For the purpose of this example, this is the image that we'll be using as the background. The image is called tablebg.jpg, and it can be found in your downloads folder. Make sure you place the image in the same folder as your HTML file so we can use a relative file path. Now apply the background attribute to the table element and set it equal to the image. Now save the file and refresh. You can see that this image has now been applied as the background to the table. We can also apply the background attribute to just the table rows, and similarly to just the table columns as well. We can align the contents of a table cell using the td_align attribute. For example, we'll place the attribute in the columns holding the values 100 to right align the text. So we can see that the values now shift to the right side of the column. The td_align attribute can also be set to left, center, and justify.